Ladies and gentlemen, before we dive into what went down last night, I need you to understand something. What you're about to hear is going to make your blood boil. It's going to make you question everything you thought you knew about loyalty, about respect, about what it means to be a professional in this business. And I guarantee you, by the time I'm done explaining what Seth Rollins just did, you're going to have some very strong opinions. So hit that like button, smash subscribe, and drop a comment right now telling me if you think what happened was justified or if this was the most cowardly, pathetic display we've seen in years. Because trust me, the internet is about to explode over this one. Now, let me set the stage for you. The Vision, this group that's been systematically dismantling everyone in their path for months, finally had their moment. They were standing on that stage, celebrating what they believed was their complete dominance over the roster. Drew McIntyre, Sheamus, and the rest of their crew were soaking in the moment, microphones in hand, telling the world that nobody could stop them. They had just laid waste to another victim, and they were making it crystal clear that their reign of terror was far from over. The crowd was booing, sure, but there was this unsettling feeling in the arena. It felt like they might actually be right. It felt like maybe, just maybe, nobody was left who could stand up to them. And that's when the music hit. That's when the entire arena lost their minds. That's when Seth freaking Rollins made his return after being out for months, recovering from injuries that the Vision themselves inflicted upon him. But here's where it gets interesting, and here's where you need to pay very close attention because the details matter. Seth didn't just walk out there for a stare down. He didn't come out to cut a promo about revenge or talk about getting his hands on them at the next pay-per-view. No, Seth Rollins did something that has divided the entire wrestling community right down the middle, and I'm watching social media absolutely tear itself apart over whether this was heroic or whether this was the actions of someone who's lost all sense of honor. Seth stormed that stage like a man possessed. Security didn't even have time to react. The Vision turned around, and before they could even process what was happening, Rollins was already launching himself at Drew McIntyre with a fury that I haven't seen from him in years. And I'm not talking about your standard wrestling attack. I'm not talking about a few punches and then everyone getting separated. What Seth Rollins did to the Vision on that stage was nothing short of complete and utter destruction. He hit Drew with a stomp out of nowhere, and Drew's head bounced off that stage floor in a way that made everyone in the arena gasp. Sheamus tried to intervene, tried to protect his brother, and Seth caught him with a super kick that echoed through the entire building. One by one, Seth was taking apart every single member of the Vision with a calculated precision that showed he had been planning this moment for months. But here's what's making people absolutely furious, and here's what's got half the internet calling Seth a hero and the other half calling him a disgrace. The Vision was not prepared for a fight. They were in street clothes, holding microphones, completely vulnerable. They had just finished a match. They were exhausted. And Seth, who had been sitting at home recovering, fresh and ready, unleashed everything he had on them when they were at their most defenseless. Now, before you jump in the comments and start yelling at me, hear me out, because this is where the moral complexity of this whole situation really comes into play. And this is why I think this moment is going to be talked about for years to come. On one hand, you have people arguing that the Vision deserves everything they got and more. These are the same people who have been watching for months as the Vision brutalized innocent wrestlers, attacked people from behind, injured Seth Rollins himself in a situation where he was outnumbered and defenseless. They'll tell you that karma is real, that what goes around comes around, and that Seth was simply giving them a taste of their own medicine. They'll point out that the Vision has never played by the rules, has never shown mercy, has never given their opponents a fair fight, so why should Seth extend them any courtesy? They'll say that in the world of professional wrestling, revenge is a dish best served cold, and Seth served it ice cold on that stage. They'll celebrate this moment as the triumphant return of a hero who was wronged, who suffered, who was told he might never wrestle again because of what the Vision did to him, and who came back to deliver justice with his own two hands. But then you have the other side, and their argument is equally compelling, equally passionate, and equally valid. These are the people who are absolutely disgusted with what Seth did. They're saying that Seth Rollins, a multiple-time world champion, a future Hall of Famer, someone who has positioned himself as a locker room leader, just threw away every bit of moral high ground he had. They're arguing that what Seth did was no different than what the Vision has been doing all along. They're saying that by attacking the Vision when they were unprepared, when they were vulnerable, when they couldn't properly defend themselves, Seth has become exactly what he claims to hate. They're pointing out the hypocrisy of Seth complaining for months about how the Vision jumped him unfairly, only to turn around and do the exact same thing. They're questioning his character, his integrity, and whether he truly represents the values he claims to represent. And you know what makes this even more complicated? The way Seth's face looked during that attack. This wasn't the calculated, cool architect we remember. This wasn't even the maniacal laugh of the Monday Night Messiah. This was pure, unadulterated rage. This was a man who had been pushed beyond his breaking point. When the cameras zoomed in on his face as he was stomping away at Drew McIntyre, there was something almost frightening in his eyes. It was the look of someone who wasn't thinking about right or wrong, wasn't thinking about optics or reputation, wasn't thinking about anything except inflicting as much pain as humanly possible on the people who took months of his career away from him. And that's what makes this so fascinating from a storytelling perspective, because we're watching a character who might be transforming into something darker, something more dangerous, something that even he might not fully understand or control. Let me break down exactly what happened move by move, because the choreography of this attack tells its own story. Seth hit the stage and immediately went for Drew McIntyre, which makes tactical sense because Drew is the muscle, the enforcer, the one who poses the biggest physical threat. Seth knew that if he didn't neutralize Drew first, this entire attack could backfire spectacularly. That stomp on the stage was vicious, and I mean genuinely vicious. Drew was out cold, and you could see medical personnel immediately rushing to check on him. Sheamus, being the loyal friend he is, immediately tried to fight back, but Seth was ready for him. That superkick was perfectly timed, catching Sheamus right on the button and sending him sprawling across the stage. The other members of the Vision tried to regroup, tried to mount some kind of defense, but Seth was moving like a man who had spent every single day of his recovery planning exactly this scenario. He knew where each of them would be, he knew how they'd react, and he exploited every single opening. What happened next is what really has people talking. Seth grabbed a steel chair. Now, remember, this is all happening on the stage, not in the ring where there's some level of protection. This is happening on the hard wooden stage where one wrong move could end a career or worse. Seth took that chair and he didn't just hit people with it, he brutalized them. He was swinging for the fences with every shot, aiming for heads, for backs, for anywhere that would cause maximum damage. The sound of steel meeting flesh was echoing through the arena, and the crowd was in this weird state of being simultaneously horrified and excited. You could hear people cheering, but you could also hear people gasping and covering their mouths. It was one of those moments where you genuinely don't know how to feel because what you're watching is so intense, so real, so visceral that your emotions are just completely scrambled. Security finally started pouring out, probably 24 guards, and even then they struggled to contain Seth. He was fighting them off, trying to get back at the Vision, screaming things that the broadcast couldn't pick up but you could read on his lips. The rage hadn't subsided even a little bit. If anything, being pulled away seemed to make him angrier. He was throwing security guards off of him like they were nothing, and it took what looked like every single security person in the building to finally create enough distance between Seth and the Vision. And even as they were dragging him backstage, Seth was still trying to break free, still screaming at the Vision, still making it clear that as far as he was concerned, this wasn't over. This was just the beginning. Now let's talk about the Vision's reaction, because this is important. Drew McIntyre, once he regained consciousness and was helped to his feet, looked absolutely shell-shocked. This is a man who has built his entire persona around being the toughest guy in the room, the one who doesn't back down from anyone, and he just got knocked out cold in front of millions of people. The humiliation was written all over his face. Sheamus was holding his jaw, and you could see him talking to Drew, probably trying to figure out how they let this happen, how they let their guard down enough for Seth to get the jump on them like that. The rest of the Vision looked equally stunned. These guys have been the hunters for so long that they forgot what it feels like to be the hunted. They forgot what it feels like to be on the receiving end of an ambush. And you could see in that moment that the entire dynamic had shifted. But here's what I find most interesting about all of this, and this is where I think the story is really going. The Vision, for all their villainy, for all their brutal attacks and dishonorable tactics, they've always operated as a unit. They've always stuck together, always had each other's backs, always presented themselves as this unbreakable brotherhood. Seth just exposed a vulnerability. He showed that they can be gotten to. He showed that they're not invincible. He showed that one man, with enough motivation and enough rage, can bring them all down simultaneously. That's a powerful message to send, not just to the Vision, but to every other wrestler in that locker room who's been intimidated by them, who's been afraid to stand up to them. Seth just proved that it can be done. And this brings us to the bigger question that everyone's debating right now. Did Seth Rollins do the right thing? Now, I'm not going to sit here and tell you what to think because this is genuinely one of those situations where there's no clear right answer. This is the kind of moral ambiguity that makes for incredible storytelling. If you believe that the Vision needed to be taught a lesson, that they needed to feel the fear and pain they've been inflicting on others, then Seth is your hero. He's the vigilante who took justice into his own hands when nobody else would. He's the guy who said enough is enough and actually did something about it. He's the warrior who came back from injury not weakened but strengthened by his desire for revenge. If that's your perspective, then what happened on that stage was cathartic, was satisfying, was exactly what needed to happen. But if you believe that there's a right way and a wrong way to handle conflict, if you believe that stooping to your enemy's level makes you just as bad as they are, if you believe that true strength is shown through restraint and taking the high road, then Seth just lost your respect. He had an opportunity to be better than the Vision, to show them up by beating them fairly in the ring, to prove that honor and integrity ultimately triumph over brutality and cowardice. Instead, he chose violence. He chose to attack them when they were vulnerable. He chose to become what he hated. And if that's your perspective, then what happened on that stage was disappointing, was a betrayal of what Seth claimed to stand for, was the moment a hero became a villain. Let me throw another wrench into this whole discussion. What if this was exactly what the Vision wanted? Stay with me here because this is where it gets really interesting. Think about it. The Vision has been trying to break Seth Rollins for months. They've attacked him physically, they've attacked his pride, they've tried to get into his head. What if their ultimate goal wasn't just to injure Seth, but to fundamentally change who he is? What if they wanted to turn him into the kind of person who would do exactly what he did on that stage? Because now, Seth can't claim moral superiority. He can't position himself as the good guy fighting against evil. He's shown that he's willing to use the same tactics as the Vision, which means they've won in a much deeper, more psychological way. They've proven that everyone has a breaking point, that everyone can be corrupted, that everyone can be pulled down to their level if you push hard enough. Think about the ramifications of this moving forward. Management is going to have to respond to what Seth did. You can't just have wrestlers attacking each other outside of sanctioned matches without consequences. Is Seth going to be fined? Suspended? Are we going to see some kind of no-contact order issued? Or is management going to recognize that the Vision had this coming and look the other way? Every decision made in response to this attack is going to be scrutinized, is going to be debated, is going to have people choosing sides. And that's exactly what makes this so compelling. This isn't a simple story with clear heroes and villains anymore. This is messy, this is complicated, this is the kind of situation where everyone involved has valid arguments and legitimate grievances. And let's talk about what this means for Seth's character going forward. Is this a one-time explosion of rage, or is this the new normal for him? Is Seth going to continue down this darker path, or is he going to wake up tomorrow, realize what he did, and feel remorse? Because that's the fascinating thing about revenge. It feels justified in the moment, but the aftermath can be complicated. Seth might wake up and feel like he compromised his principles. He might look at himself in the mirror and not recognize the person staring back at him, or he might feel completely satisfied, completely vindicated, and ready to do it again if the Vision steps out of line. Both directions would make for compelling television, but they would paint very different pictures of who Seth Rollins is as a character. The locker room reaction is going to be equally interesting to watch. How do Seth's friends and allies respond to what he did? Do they support him, understanding that sometimes you have to fight fire with fire? Or do they pull him aside and tell him he went too far? And what about the younger wrestlers, the ones who look up to Seth as a veteran and a leader? What message does this send to them about how to handle conflict? About whether the ends justify the means? About where the line is between justice and revenge? These are not simple questions, and the way the story addresses them is going to determine whether this becomes a classic angle or just another forgettable moment. I also want to talk about the physicality of what we witnessed because it's easy to get caught up in the moral debate and forget that what we saw was genuinely shocking from an in-ring perspective. Seth Rollins has always been athletic, has always been innovative, but the level of aggression he displayed was on another level entirely. Every move was thrown with bad intentions. There was no performative aspect to it, no playing to the crowd, no calculated strategy. This was pure violence, and it was uncomfortable to watch in the best possible way. It reminded me of some of the most intense moments in wrestling history, those moments where the line between performance and reality gets blurry and you genuinely don't know what's going to happen next. The camera work during this whole segment deserves credit too. They didn't cut away. They didn't try to sanitize what was happening. They let us see every brutal moment, every chair shot, every moment of chaos. That takes guts from a production standpoint because you're essentially broadcasting something that could be seen as too violent, too real, too intense for your typical audience. But it was the right call because it made the moment feel authentic and impactful. You weren't watching a scripted wrestling angle. You were watching what felt like a genuine fight, and that's increasingly rare in today's product. So where do we go from here? That's the million-dollar question that everyone's asking. The obvious next step would be some kind of match between Seth and the Vision, probably at the next major pay-per-view. But what kind of match does justice to this level of intensity? A regular singles match feels too tame. We need something that allows for the chaos we just witnessed to continue in a controlled environment. Maybe a no disqualification match. Maybe a street fight. Maybe something even more extreme that allows both sides to unleash everything they have without restraint. Because after what we saw on that stage, anything less would feel like a letdown. There's also the question of whether this becomes a long-term story or gets resolved quickly. I personally hope they let this breathe. I hope they don't rush to a conclusion because the emotional complexity of this situation deserves time to develop. We need to see Seth dealing with the aftermath of what he did. We need to see the Vision's response, their plan for revenge on the revenge. We need to see how this affects everyone around them. This shouldn't be a one-month program that gets wrapped up at the next show. This should be something that runs for months, building to a climactic confrontation that feels earned and satisfying. And let's not forget about the championship implications. Both Seth and members of the Vision are always in or around the title picture. How does this feud affect those pursuits? Does management decide to keep them away from championship opportunities until they resolve their issues? Or do we get the added drama of them potentially having to put their personal vendetta aside to focus on title matches? Either way, there are so many directions this story can go, so many possibilities to explore, and that's what has me genuinely excited about the coming weeks and months. I keep coming back to that moment when Seth's music hit and the crowd exploded. That pop was real. That was people genuinely shocked and excited to see Seth return. But as the attack continued and the brutality escalated, you could hear the crowd's reaction become more complex, more uncertain. That's good storytelling. That's creating a moment that forces people to actually think about what they're cheering for, to examine their own values and perspectives. Too often in wrestling, we're told exactly how to feel. This is rare instance where we're being trusted to form our own opinions and live with the complexity of not having easy answers. The social media reaction has been absolutely insane. I've been scrolling through Twitter, through Instagram, through Facebook, and I'm seeing the wrestling community more divided than I've seen in years. There are people writing essays defending Seth's actions, breaking down every reason why this was justified. There are people writing equally long essays condemning what he did, arguing that he's lost his way. There are people creating memes, creating fan art, creating video packages. This is the kind of moment that gets people talking, that gets people engaged, that reminds us why we love this crazy business in the first place. What I appreciate most about this whole situation is that it doesn't treat the audience like children. It doesn't give us a clear-cut hero to cheer and a clear-cut villain to boo. It presents us with a situation where everyone has understandable motivations, where everyone has committed wrongdoings, where everyone is operating in shades of gray rather than black and white. That's how real life works. That's how real conflicts develop. And bringing that level of nuance to professional wrestling storytelling is something we don't see often enough. So here's what I want from you. I want you to drop a comment right now telling me your honest, unfiltered opinion about what Seth Rollins did. Do you think he was justified? Do you think he went too far? Are you Team Seth or Team Vision? And more importantly, where do you think this story should go next? What would you do if you were writing this program? Because the beauty of wrestling is that we all become fantasy bookers, we all have opinions about how things should play out, and those discussions are half the fun. Hit that like button if this breakdown helped you process what you saw. Hit that subscribe button if you want more deep dives into the biggest moments in wrestling. And hit that notification bell so you don't miss any of the fallout from this insane situation. Because trust me, this story is just getting started, and if last night was any indication, we are in for one hell of a ride. Seth Rollins is back, the Vision has been put on notice, and the entire landscape has been changed in one explosive moment. This is wrestling at its finest, messy and complicated and absolutely unmissable.